First off, we're going to start with Michelle Campbell presenting some work that the FDA did that I actually was a part of before I left the FDA. So, Michelle, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming back to day two. I'm Michelle Campbell. I'm the Associate Director for Stakeholder Engagement, Clinical Outcomes for the Office of Neuroscience. And for the next hour, we're going to be having a conversation about really putting the patients first, or as I like to call it, walking the talk. Okay, and I'm going to be sharing you examples that I think really show us of walking the talk and really applying what we have in our patient-focused drug development guidance series. This is the roadmap to patient-focused outcome measurement in clinical trials. And so we're really going to be focusing the next hour on endpoints and what we need for our clinical trials and where are the opportunities to make sure we are getting the lived experience incorporated in. And so for those of you who are not familiar with this graphic, for us who are in the know of measurement every day, this is kind of like our framework. This is literally what we are trying to apply. And this is outlined in our what we affectionately call guidance 3 of our patient-focused drug development series. But really it lays out what we really need to know when we're trying to apply selecting appropriate clinical outcome assessments to support our trial endpoints, right? That is the trial endpoint, that primary endpoint is what's going to tell us if this drug works, right? We need to make sure we're selecting the appropriate outcome measures and assessments to do that. So I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about a couple of examples. Like I said, I call it walking the talk, and these are things that actually FDA has funded. So we actually said, hey, we're going to show that you can do this with some examples. And we have some really great examples. Both of these are from work out of Act for ALS efforts. But I think they're great examples that can be leveraged across many diseases and with good frameworks. So the first, Teresa mentioned and highlighted, which was the development and adaptation of the ALS FRS for remote use. And it was a comparability study. And so you're probably sitting there going, well, why would we need to do that, right? Well, we really thought about this as lessons learned from the pandemic, right? And we saw everything trying to shift to being done at home. What could we do at home and take things out of the clinic? But it's not just simple, like, we're going to now do this assessment at home, or we're now going to make someone do a 10-meter walk from their house, right? We have to really be thoughtful to make sure that can actually be done and that we can still interpret those study results in the same way we would from the clinic setting. And so with this was what we hoped to do, which was to determine acceptable methods for remote administration of the scale, to adapt and evaluate various remote modes, to create a standardized approach to actually administering the scale, and to look at the measurement properties, because we are a little bit measurement nerdy sometimes when we're talking about endpoints, to make sure that we could actually leverage an in-clinic assessment with the remote use at-home assessment. So first and foremost, incorporating the patient voice and the caregiver voice was critically important to this. And so we made sure to engage with patients and advocates to help guide and plan this effort. There was training materials that were developed. We did conduct a pilot study with iterative qualitative efforts, getting feedback from our patient committee, which we'll talk about in a second. And then we did the comparability study. So this is a great quote coming directly from our patients that we worked with and our patients committee, which was nothing about us is without us. And so they were first and foremost in this effort. It was something that we very much said at the beginning of this effort. We were the ones who put it out, saying in this contract that the patients must be included in a committee. So we had a multinational patient committee. We had people with ALS were a part of it. We had care partners. We did have a neurologist, and we had some measurement experts who helped participate and also facilitate. And I'm fortunate that Carla is here today, who will be talking about other things in doing this kind of work, which RTI was the group that did lead this effort. So we developed a standardized training as well for the remote assessment based on currently available literature of how to administer the scale. It was reviewed by the patient committee as well as important key opinion leaders and FDA SMEs. It was pilot tested. It was well received, and it will be made available publicly. So pilot testing, it's always good to kind of get a sense of what we're doing, right? Again, putting together what we've done. So we did some qualitative interviews with both clinicians, caregivers, and persons living with ALS to kind of get a sense. And specifically, we were looking for their use of technology. Because this was a comparability study, we wanted to make sure, and we were going to be looking at different modes of administration. We wanted to see what was the level and comfort of using technology, which we know is higher in this population because of the use of voice to technology and things like that. But we needed to get a good sense because we were trying to do a U.S. national geographically located study that we were going to be able to get a good sense of what are those capabilities. And one of the things we wanted to make sure also was access to actually the internet, which is a big thing when we're trying to implement studies. And so what was that access going to look like? So we pilot tested, we got some good feedback that was incorporated into our actual study. There were 7 sites nationally within the US, distributed across the US. You can see that on, I guess that's your guys' left side too. And we did 3 versions. We had an in-person, a telephone, and a video-based. And so they were interchanged. So people were stratified based on their the mode of administration, as well as they also had an in-clinic visit that happened. So you can see what that looked like when we put it out, that we were able to compare in person with these 3 different modes. This was a short study because we weren't there trying to establish new, per se, measurement things. We needed to confirm what was already existing, that we could use this in these different modes. So we could do a short observational study. We saw strong correlation still with the ALS FRS when it was used in the other modes outside of clinic. So that's really great to see that we're retaining what was already there. And then the big thing was a test retest, right? So could we re-administer this scale a couple weeks later and still get those same results? And this was here, as you see in telephone and video, which is really important because that is saying, yes, that we're still able to maintain those same results. And so I think that's important to know. That was actually the number one thing I wanted to hear was we didn't lose anyone, right? We can reliably reassess the scale and still get the same measurement properties. So we also want to check with satisfaction with remote administration. So I think everyone talks about how decentralized trials, this is a really great thing, and it decreases burden. We definitely think that, but I have been learning a lot in the last couple, I would say months, the last couple of years, where I am hearing from communities that say, you know what, I'm not sure I want remote administration. I'm not sure I want decentralized trials for everything, because they have a bond connected with that site. And so for them, that is a social aspect of going to that visit, or there's aspects of going to clinic that is to them advantageous over decentralized trials. I'm not saying we should not think about that, but it's something to consider when we're incorporating decentralized trial aspects in our trials. What does that look like? And making sure that your community that you're going to be recruiting understands what that commitment looks like, and are they going to be able to commit to that aspect? So we had most were very happy with it. We also talked to the raters at the sites, how they felt about it. They thought it went well as well. But there was this conversation piece about the importance that people felt about going into clinic. Okay, so the end, what's the big story? Well, there was no significant difference between the total scores with remote or in-person administration. So for us, what does that mean at FDA? That means if a sponsor comes in to me tomorrow and says, hey, Michelle, we would like to offer and maybe administer the ALS FRS as a mix between in-clinic and remote. Are you okay with that? We now have a study that's an evidence that suggests, yeah, we can do that, and we'll be able to understand those results and make that same interpretation. And that is a really great win that we can incorporate now into advice if we're asked about it. We also found, which was a nice finding, that it did not matter the order of administration. You still got the same results. And so that's good too as options. So we were really excited about this study and what happened, and we can start to put advice into that now. Okay, another quick example of what we did, and this was through a summary of the literature looking at non-ALS FRS outcomes that may be captured in clinical trials from the literature. So everyone says, Michelle, we're capturing all these things. Well, we wanted to know what was actually in the literature. And so we decided to take that far left-hand part of that roadmap and say, well, let's actually follow our roadmap and do the first piece, which is what do we already know that exists? And so what we wanted to do was to identify the concepts that were meaningful to people living with ALS, to identify tools that measure those concepts, and to assess where further development was needed and where additional information was. We did have a piece on digital health technologies, but I'm going to focus on the first three things for the next couple minutes. So we went through the literature. We had the Critical Path Institute through CPR&D was the one who led this, and they had a contract with a group that do it. Shout out to Vector, see RJ here. And they put together going through this literature. And so what do we find? We found these are concepts of interest that were being captured in the literature in studies that did things with ALS patients. So these could be observational studies. These could have been clinical trials or clinical type studies of some type of intervention, right? But we were getting these various concepts, and these are the concepts that we also, are important, and we want to confirm though with our population that these are the right things, that we're not missing anything. So this is what the literature was telling us. We then looked at what kind of outcome assessments were now being used. This was a list of 10 outcome assessments that we selected to take a deeper dive in. Some of these align to what is in the All ALS Natural History Study that's funded by NIH right now, but these are more ALS specific scales that we saw that were identified in the literature that were being used in some type of research studies design. And we wanted to evaluate using the criteria that we need to determine if it's something that's fit for purpose based on what does the literature tell us? What are the gaps that's available, right? Because everyone tells me it takes measurement, takes forever to get done. So here we want to leverage what do we already know to identify those gaps. And so I love this table very much because it lays out what the gaps are. And so someone can now come and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to focus on one of these scales on the left-hand side. And I now know what the gaps are. Can I build, what evidence now do I need to add? Well, we now know what the gaps are. And can we build that into our study to support the use of this COA? The big thing for me was not surprising, but it was sad, was that we have no qualitative work. So none of these instruments have actually talked to families, caregivers, persons living with ALS about, are we really capturing what's important to you? Or does the item stems make sense? Do the response options make sense to you in this time period? We are really missing that gap. And that is a big gap. And for my measurement friends in the room, we all know that without that work, we are going to lose potentially a really great scale. We have to have this fundamental work. So this is out there for the public to see. And so if someone wants to start looking at some of this stuff, these are where the gaps are in these scales. And so while it was sad to see, it is also showing me where our next future steps can be and what that potential is and how do we gain that evidence that we need. So again, we're going to spend some time, I think, Fraser, talking about this in a little way of how we incorporate our efforts in this with this roadmap. And with that, I thank you and turn it back to Fraser for our discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. And I think one of the things, I don't know if you pointed this out, but one of the wonderful things from my perspective is that this involved all the medical product centers at FDA. And so you had a wide variety of expertise coming together and making sure that this was going to be something that was robust and regulatory science ready. So what I want to start out with today is first I'll say, unfortunately, our colleague Robin Carson, the Vice President of Patient-Centered Outcome Research at AbbVie, was sick and unable to travel, so she's not going to be able to join us today. But she did send me some wonderful thoughts, and I will be sharing those throughout as we go along. And to start out, I'd love to have a discussion about, talk a little bit about the importance of the patient-focused drug development process, and maybe also some of the difficulties of implementing this that we've experienced. And so, Lauren, if you could introduce yourself and give me some of your thoughts, that'd be wonderful.
Sure. I'm Lauren Holder. I am a patient advocate and also gene positive for Huntington's disease, and also in the prodromal phase of HD, dealing with some cognitive and behavioral symptoms myself, but a long time patient advocate in this space. So my experience with the PFDD was actually, I've been to two. So we had one in 2015, and then we had another one recently in 2024. And I would say that leading up to it, obviously there was a lot of feelings, and the community was really wanting to share how they felt about things. And getting into that room, everybody was really excited, but that feeling, you start to get drained during the day. It's a lot. And Michelle did a wonderful thing for our community. That is, she went off script and actually asked us what was meaningful to the community and brought life back in. Because when she showed that interest in what we were doing, when she showed that she had questions, it truly made our community feel like the FDA cared. And that is what led to everything that is happening from that point of PFDD. So I feel like it was a very successful meeting for that reason alone, and just that knowing that someone is actively asking questions. She also acknowledged something that was very important to our community that nobody had been acknowledging, and that is the fact that we have this sense of urgency. I am 39 years old. I tested positive when I was 20, and we have had failures in our community as far as clinical trials. That's to be expected, but we are definitely at a point where we're tired and burnt out, and there is a sense of urgency, especially in my group of people who are pre-symptomatic and prodromal, starting to experience symptoms of this sense of urgency of, I want to be here for my family. I want to have a quality of life. And so Michelle acknowledged that she sees that sense of urgency. And for us, that was huge. So thank you, Michelle, for that. Because when you acknowledge it, when you take the time to just to say, I see you, I hear you, it makes it so much more meaningful when you ask the question. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I think you're referring to the patient listening sessions, correct?
So
That was actual PFDD.
externally led PFD.
Oh, actually,
ALS
I have
development.
PFD. Okay, thank you. Carla, I'll go to you next. Could you answer the same questions? Talk a little bit about how it's been important, and also maybe touch on some difficulties on the implementation.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I'm Carla Romano. I'm part of the patient-centered outcomes assessment team at RTI Health Solutions. I've been at RTI, this is my 19th year, so I've been working in patient-centered outcomes for quite a while across a wide variety of therapeutic areas. And prior to that, and I'm really going to date myself, I was at Merck as an epidemiologist and focused on patient-centered outcomes there for 15 years. So I was one of the people who was there kind of pre-PFDD, from before there were these wonderful guidance. And I remember when CPATH started, so I just want to congratulate CPATH and FDA for coming such a long way for hearing patients. For me, having that guidance in place didn't necessarily change the way we do our work, but it gave us for the first time a roadmap and guidance, and gave us teeth. So something we could point to and say, this is not a nice to have piece of drug development, but a must have. If we want our drugs to improve patient lives, we need to understand what their needs, wants, desires, fears are, and get them on the table, and then try to map across these treatment benefits, as Michelle has been trying to work towards with her recent publication on what is a meaningful treatment benefit. So I feel like I've had one of the greatest jobs in the world over the past 25 plus years. I've gotten to spend time with persons living with disease, got to hear their stories, and I hope that the work that we do honors those stories as it tries to bring forward what they tell us. So pre-guidance, we would often hear from clinical teams, the drug development teams that, oh, that would be wonderful if we could do that. But, you know, that's a nice to have. There's not time, there's not money. So having guidance has generated and turned resources towards time and money to focus on patient voice and make sure that it's really part of the trial. And it can't be ignored. It is a checkbox now on your submission. And if you don't submit some patient voice data, patient experience data, FDA and other regulators across the globe are going to need to look somewhere else. And that might not necessarily be the most credible, most robustly generated data. So I think it behooves all of us to take the time, make that investment. The guidance if we follow it, there's a great roadmap in order to robustly collect these data and feel like we're presenting something credible back to people who are the decision makers. Collaborating with Fraser and Michelle on the ALS project, I got to see FDA in action. It was so interesting to me and such a rewarding experience to sit on the same side of the table instead of trying to present evidence that we generated and tried to show FDA how we followed guidance. I got to walk with FDA as we employed the guidance and collected this information. It was incredibly rewarding. Michelle talked a little bit about our patient committee for the ALS FRS-R study. Just an incredibly generous group of people who spent their very precious time trying to educate us and help us to get to where they are so that we could meet them at that place and understand what treatment benefit might look like, what it might mean, thinking about tools like the ALS FRS-R and how we can collect those data. Even the types of remote modalities that we ended up studying were based on feedback that we received from the patient committee, from our pilot study. Post-COVID, it was easy for us to jump to the idea, oh, we should just do Zoom meetings. Then we can see the patient, we can talk with the patient, and then learning from the patient committee that that is not necessarily going to work for everyone. There are access issues. There are people who simply don't want to be or aren't comfortable on camera. We need a low-tech version. We need telephone, and then we need telephones that you can have a speaker phone so that if someone is having a communication difficulty, a care partner can be in the room to help translate what the person is trying to say. So coming back to those very core experiences, the lived experience guided our trial design. It guided the types of training that we put forward, and then just basically gave us that sounding board. We'd like to try this. What do you think, patient committee? Sometimes very gently saying, oh, Carla, no, and redirecting us. And other times, yes, we like that. Thank you for doing that. And at our last patient committee meeting of that study, those who joined us used words like they were joyful at the result, that now there were options. And the fact that there was no sequence effect meant you could start out in clinic with your team that you love. We heard a lot about hugs, and that going into clinic gives you that opportunity for that human connection. But if I'm having a bad day, perhaps I fell, I don't have the energy to get to clinic. Now there's another option, and I don't have to drop out of this clinical trial. So it was really moving. And I'll share this, and Michelle, you might have thought of it also, but on that last patient committee day, one of our charter members sent us an email, and to excuse herself at the beginning of the meeting, she wrote, "I'm sorry, but I need to urgently go to the hospital." And that was our Angelique, and she passed a few days later. But talking about commitment to research, she had prepared an email for all of us that went out after her passing to tell us how much she appreciated being part of the research and what it meant to her, and kind of her last input into our committee. So it's an experience I'll never forget, and one I'll always come back to.
That's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. Moving on, Mike, you've had some interesting thoughts on this. Would you care to share some with us?
Sure. So let me tell you a bit about myself. Mike Panzera. I'm currently Chief Medical Officer at a company called Novartis Neurosciences and Grin Therapeutics. I'm a neurologist by training. I've, after some time in academics, ended up entering industry. beginning at Biogen, where I was there for several years, oversaw development of a few drugs there before going on to Genzyme, which became Sanofi Genzyme, and oversaw again a couple of the approval of a few drugs while I was there. And then from there, moved on to a company called Wave Life Sciences, which is a pre-revenue biotech focused on neurodegenerative diseases, before ending up where I am now, which is a pre-revenue, private equity-owned private biotech. So I've gone from Biogen at the time was a mid-sized biotech to the largest pharma company in the world at Sanofi, down to a publicly traded pre-revenue to a private. And so I've had this whole spectrum of experiencing leadership roles in each of these environments. And I would say both the time, things have changed over time in this area of patient-focused drug development, but also each of these different viewpoints is different, and how it's done, and whether you can do it, and the arguments, if sense, you have to make sure it gets done. And because it is not all the same. It's not the same type of approach. In a large public company, this, especially joining Genzyme, which was founded essentially on basically a rare forgotten diseases, was essentially the ultra rare foundation. So the patient was the center of everything at Genzyme from the very beginning. That was from the top down, and it became just part of the culture. And, of course, then this approach to patient-focused drug development grew and grew and grew, and it just sort of was integrated. But when you go to a small company with limited resources, and you think of how to incorporate these types of things often are viewed by a board as taking time, taking money. And well, they do. They take time and they take money. And when you're pre-revenue, you basically have fixed money and fixed time. That's it. You have money that's supposed to be for a certain thing, and you have a limited number of time to do it before your investors basically say, we're done, or you need to raise more. And that's a critical element of the survival of a biotech. And that's just the way it is. And so what I learned is the importance when you're in those discussions and you're talking about this is something that needs to be done. This is because it's not only the right thing to do, and it's important as part of the development, but you have to say when you're saying, well, that's going to take time and that's going to cost money, it becomes a discussion of, yeah, but this is how we bring value. This is how we bring value. This is the value we bring to the community. This is the value that we will bring to our company. This is the value we'll bring to the asset. And a lot of my time now spent educating investors as to why this is important to them. I mean, an investor invests to make money. That's it. But they also invest to money comes from bringing things of value. And in the conversation about bringing patients into the drug development process as something that brings value, benefits them, benefits society, that has to be part of it, and that is part of it. And I've been fortunate that I've had boards who saw that. And I mean, I have several examples, one of which involved very close collaboration with CPATH and the D-Risk consortium. Examples with the Huntington's consortium. But the D-Risk consortium was one where, we decided to, when I was at Wave, to enter the complex integrated design program with a proposal to use data within the CPATH consortium, within D-Risk, the shared data, to develop a phase 3 program using to mitigating, I should say, augmenting the placebo group, so we didn't have to put as many placebo patients into our phase 3 study. The complex and innovative design program takes time. It added time. It was great for engagement to the agency. The agency was at the table. There was huge support, but that delays the start of a phase 3 study by 3 months. Now you say, 3 months, that's not much. Well, again, when you have a fixed runway and you have commitments, to, especially in a publicly traded company, to provide things at a certain time, that's a lot of pressure. And you need to have a company that's willing to see that value and bring that forward. So a lot of, again, the job there was to show why this was a good thing for everybody. And the support of CPATH during that was critical, facilitating all the communication with the different companies who contributed their data to the pool, so we could use those data. Every company mostly was very collaborative during that point to give us those data, and we learned a lot about the value of having something like CPATH could bring to, again, reducing the number of placebo patients required to be in a trial and using creative Bayesian statistical techniques to enable it. So the company was willing to do that. And then again, in that, we had to agree in that program to share all the learnings publicly. That is something that's not always something that would be agreed to. But again, the value of doing that and the support to the community is important. And in our current program, GRIN Therapeutics, we are developing a small molecule for GRIN-related neurodevelopmental disorder, rare disease. And much of the pathways in these rare epilepsies, neurodevelopmental epilepsies, has involved seizure reduction. So if you're in a company with limited resources and no prospects of no revenue, so what do? You develop for seizures quickly and you get the drug approved. But that's not what the community wanted early on. Before we had phase 1 data. We basically decided to do a survey because nobody had ever spoken to the GRIN community before about what they wanted. And yes, seizure reduction is important, but overwhelmingly, an impact on non-seizure symptoms was the thing they wanted most. And those without seizures, which is about 50% of the population, they didn't want to be left behind because seizures were easy to treat. So we did the survey. That's what the survey showed. We internally had a lot of discussions about how long it was going to take and how difficult it is to show any impact on non-seizure outcome assessments in a trial of an ultra-rare disease where you can't adequately power these studies, but you're trying to do something that's most important. And that took a lot of internal convincing. The agency engagement early was critical to seeing that happen, who could work with us and figuring out how we might be able to do a development program. And the partnership with the GRIN community, again, both in the US, but also ex-US, EMA's engagement on this, the PDCO's engagement on this. It was truly, we had to, from the beginning of our development, figure out how we were going to engage every stakeholder, get a program together, and not delay the study substantially. In the end, we probably took about a 1/4 hit. That's not a lot for having something that could be so meaningful, but it takes time to convince people of that. And every environment is different. So that's, I think, what I thought I was supposed to share, but this is sort of been my experience. And again, I would say 20 years ago, this never could have been possible. Nobody would have allowed this. This is just time. But the evolution of this approach, the involvement of advocacy in the drug development process, CPATH, the agency's evolution and their support of this, it's just a totally changed environment, and it continues to evolve. And so that would be my only thing, is to take the time, would be what I always tell people, is take the time. It's, yeah, I understand 1/4 sounds like crazy, to 1/4, even 2/4 in something that brings such great value. It just takes an effort to convince people of that, but it's doable. So
that's great. Thank you so much for those examples. I mean, one of the things that Robin mentioned in hers is that it's the need for education. And she mentioned really the PFDD guidances, the education sessions and the workshops that FDA has put on. I know there's one coming up in
Next week.
Is it next week?
Next
That we're all extraordinarily excited about. And so just having that has been really important, not only for those of us with the subject matter expertise to help us guide how FDA is thinking, but also for educating other colleagues about the importance to this. And I know that in our call to prepare for this, Lauren, you mentioned a little bit about how much the guidances and other information has meant to you and kind of the community, because these are not easy documents to get into. They're very technical. They
I say they cure insomnia.
they do.
I mean, I'll say it.
I have seen
Must.
that.
Might have helped write some of those parts.
People at the FDA have to constantly remind themselves that they are not writing the textbook. They are writing the thing that references the textbooks. So, so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what that's meant to you and how that's been important.
Yeah, I mean, guidance and having that education is very important, especially when you're dealing with a rare disease community where the majority of the community are not doing what I do, where I'm going and actively looking for things and researching it and have from the beginning. And so being able to go back and educate my community on their level of things is huge. And so, yes, I mean, it's been great in that aspect because then our community understands why things happen the way they do, why something takes as long as it does, why they need to speak up. You know, those are things that they don't normally think about, or they're too busy to think about because they're caregivers. You know, a lot of us who are gene positive are also young caregivers. So a lot of the time they're not thinking about any of that. But if I go back, as I have a podcast that I do for our community that I produce and host, and I go back and I educate them on what I have learned through this process, that helps to motivate others in the community to get involved, especially when they know that, you know, FDA has taken an interest, or Critical Path Institute is interested in hearing from them. And, you know, I have regular meetings with CPAP. They have been phenomenal in listening, in making sure that we continue to move forward after the PFDD and having action items, next steps, and making sure that we follow up with that, not just with the community, but with all stakeholders. And that has been absolutely huge for us because for the first time, we feel like we have a seat at the table, and that other people are not talking for us and not looking at what really isn't meaningful. So it's been just really the last 5 to 10 years of that, and it's been phenomenal. And going back to, you know, 20 years ago, you're right. 20 years ago, I was told I have a death sentence. I was told there's nothing for me. I can't participate in research because I don't have any symptoms. There was nothing as far as observational studies even at that time. So there was no point. And I just basically was giving myself a death sentence. And 20 years later, I'm able to sit up here with you guys because I have been part of advocating to be part of the solution. So that guidance has been wonderful.
Love to hear that. And Carla, have any thoughts on this as well?
Sure. Yeah, so it's been really interesting applying the guidance. I think it's taken two pieces of our field that for a long time felt very separate. So the qualitative and the quantitative components, and bringing them together. And it does get very technical, and I think that we can happily, Michelle and I will nerd out on the guidance and talk about this measurement property or that property, but I think about what my role is when I'm working on a qualitative project and then transferring over to the quantitative is making sure that those learnings aren't lost. So we're mapping that information over and giving meaning to the quantitative numbers. So what does that score on the ALS FRS-R actually mean? What does a change in that score mean? Why do I even care that there's a change on the ALS FRS-R? So pulling those things together, I think the guidance does a good job of incorporating those different components of the research and providing a pathway to pulling those things together. I think there's still challenges. Michael, you make me nervous when you say we have to do this in a quarter. For you and the investors, that's a long time. For me, I'm thinking I have to do this in a quarter. I don't know how we can make.
Just the negotiations. is what I'm talking
Excellent.
about, yeah.
Yeah, so, and trying to have it show the value, so to investors, to regulators. It's easy to show the value to the patients if we do a good job and honor their stories and bring forward what they need us to bring forward and not come in with our own preconceived notions. Well, this is the measure that's available to me. Phase 3 is coming. We're going to put it in the clinical trial and it's going to be fine. Those days have passed. And I think to
Glad you said that.
Thank you. Yeah, so to be able to honor the patient perspective, we need to find measures that measure things that matter to them, that have meaning, and can do so in a reliable and robust way so that we can come to regulators and support drug approvals, and we can go to investors and say, this makes sense. We need to develop these tools. This is what's going to get the drug approved, get the drug in clinic, get the drug to patients. So it's been a great path, and just having these guidance to reference and having groups like CPATH to come and support us when we're trying to make those arguments is wonderful. And it's also great to be able to say, well, hey, FDA, you said if we do this, we're going to do this. So I'm putting it together.
It's always nice to hear people talk positively about guidances.
Can I add something?
Yes.
And so I think one of the things from our perspective is what, when we're writing these and put this out there, and this particular guidance series was painfully written the way it was for a good reason. And if you really look at the first 2 guidances, they're really meant for patient groups. They are really meant for folks who are not trained researchers, right? Here's what you need to do to start collecting in a scientific, rigorous way information from your community about that lived experience, right? We've heard, we're not trained to be researchers initially, and you've become now one, right? And so those first two guidances were kind of written that way for that reason. And then the last 2 are definitely way technical, but they are meant to be for those SMEs. They are meant to be to find those folks that industry are going to talk to and say, this is what we've now implemented in the trial for that endpoint. So there was some reasoning behind our thinking. The other piece is, you often hear us talk about come early and often and talk to us, come engage with us, right? And we really do believe that. And it's in many ways. So it's when industry will come in early and have these conversations, and they could be the uncomfortable conversation, right? Because you're going to ask us something that no one's asked maybe before, and the answer may not be one wants to be heard, but we've asked it and you've got guidance, and we're hopefully providing a path forward, right, of what that would be. The other piece is that early engagement, and when is it time to learn from the communities, right? And there are pathways for that. And I would say I saw Stefan Thurstup from EMA step in, so he'll agree with me when I say this, that go talk to your other regulatory authority communities as well when appropriate, because they care too about what the communities say and the patients say, or when industry has questions, come talk to all of us. But I will say some of you guys in the room have heard us ask this question when we're in a listening session or in a PFDD meeting, and we hear something new. We hear something that we're not seeing actually in maybe the trial designs that are coming into us, or we're not focused, we're hearing about a new symptom or lived experience. And you guys don't have to identify yourselves in the audience, but how many of you guys probably heard me say, have you thought about measuring this? Question mark, right? Insert whatever that was. And it's like, hey, and why is that? Well, hey, that could be actually a really supportive thing to help us in a trial design, right? Or help support your overall evidence of if there is a successful treatment, right? We have now more of this lived experience of what's important to families, what's important to patients. And we're not just focused on maybe that sole singular thing, but the broader lived experience, because that is what our communities tell us in these situations. And so we are sometimes the ones who are the ones saying, hey, maybe you should go measure this as well. And that is because we are hearing from the communities about what is important in their everyday lived experience. And again, tying that back to our efforts and really thinking about it in this broader sense of the trial design and the clinical development programs, and what can we capture.
No, and I love the point about coming early. That's a point that Robin made, is not only talking to the FDA early, but starting early on your programs and starting early on this research and coordinating with the overall development teams and with the overall program timelines. I think, Mike, that's something you mentioned, is that you've got to fit this in your timelines and you've got to fit this in your programs. And I assume that starting those conversations early helps with that.
It can or it might not, and you believe it or not, because you put it in your program, you put it in early, and then you have to, again, like we're developing a GRIN specific a CGI. So that sort of, oh, why don't we do this? Then you have a train going down the track and you realize you haven't done 5 or 6 things that should have been done by that point. So you do have to consider that. And sure, often you're retrofitting things, which is why we've been very thoughtful. Are we doing a natural history study now versus later? Again, because we want to be able to try and have all of this up front. But often, all of these, like doing a GRIN specific CGI, doing a natural history study, taking some of these outcome measures and that have never been used in GRIN and then trying to make them usable for GRIN, all of those things come with risk. And so I've talked about time. Time is one risk, money is one risk, but just risk, technical risk, because they haven't been tried before. So you can put these things in, and then there's risk associated with that. And then even engaging early, like coming early. I've always been surprised how reluctant people are to come early, but I understand it, even though I'm surprised they don't try, because I can tell you in a company, you engage early and you get the dreaded, it's a matter of review. It completely blows up every conversation, because sometimes it is a matter of review. You just can't ask a question that's is going to be a matter for review. So that even that level of engagement in a company sends people spinning when you get, oh, it's a matter of review. Oh, it means they're not aligned. So it's a little complicated in many ways. But again, but you convince them that it is worth it. I have been in meetings where the decision is not to engage because we don't want to know the answer until later. And it's like, and that's the silliness of because in a public company, every FDA interaction could become a disclosable event. So every question you ask could result in a statement that becomes material to disclose to the public. You have to be cautious about thinking about that in a leadership role in a pre-revenue biotech. In a big company, unless it's complete response, generally they can sort of absorb that kind of interaction. With a small company, even the little tiny, what you've changed, if it's changed your publicly stated objective, it's a disclosable event. And so those things have to be considered.
Thank you for that. So we're starting to get to the end, and I want to give time for questions. One thing that Robin brought up is that while there is increasing enthusiasm for this, I hope that this session shows that, and that the fact that you're all here in the audience shows that, but there's also opportunities for greater coordination. And so I think I'd wonder about if we could all get a final thought from everybody, and maybe on that theme of like, what do you think's needed next? Where do you think this needs to go? So who wants to start?
I can start. Sure. You stare me down there. So Teresa made a comment in her panel before about like when did PFD start, which was in 2012. It was in PDUFA 5. But I came to the agency in 2014, and prior to that, I had been a research coordinator, so I was recruiting all the families. So maybe that's why I'm very good at talking to people to join studies. But I worked in rare disease, and so I was very baffled when I first came and learned about PFDD, because I was sitting there going, "But isn't that what I've always done?" Right? I have to talk to families about what is important to their child and the care and the data. That was how decisions were being made in the clinic, right? So I think about what is the better coordination. I think there are opportunities throughout the drug development pipeline of where is that time. So it's not just, and thank goodness we've evolved, that it's not just the primary endpoint and how to get the patient voice into labeling, right? That was what I remember was my first foray into that. And we've progressed so much farther than that into bringing families and communities involved in the planning of the trial design. I'll never forget being a research coordinator. We won't say what years those were, and we were running a BPCA trial. That does give some time frame because when that passed. And it was an academic-led study, and it was a 3 times a day dosing of a drug. And so we're recruiting patients, and we have someone in, and I get a phone call from the parent saying, hey, can we get out of the study? And I'm like, well, is there anything wrong, right? I'm going through like safety is going through my head. Well, no. School starts next week, and that dose in the middle is when they have lunch. And that means they have to be in the nurse's office and they can't be with their friends. And so we don't want to, the child had cerebral palsy. They already know there's something different about them. We don't want to make that even more predominant. So can we please take them out of the study, right? And there's a lot of protocols because this was not something you could just stop, right? We had to do the protocols to do that. And to think now we should be thinking about that ahead of time by incorporating families in the experience early on. So you're going and talking to Mike about that, right? They're coming and talking, and Carla's hearing about it in the qualitative work. So I think coordination needs to start at the beginning. It shouldn't be the afterthought. It shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, we need to do this now because I got that marketing application I'm about to submit to FDA or EMA for review, and we forgot to go talk to patients and we have to put something in. It should have been done early. It's the other thing. And then I would say, do ask the questions and don't be afraid, as appropriate, maybe as in the Mike scenarios where he's giving, so those are some really good points. Because there are times when I scratch my head going, man, I really wish they would have come and talked to us, right? Because I'm reading things and I'm reading results, or I'm reading things that were captured, and I'm like, had they just come in right before this interaction, perhaps could there have been different advice that we could have given to help with what's being collected. And so I think we should celebrate what we've evolved to and what we are doing, because it is better than the past. But we need to continue to think about what does that look like, and why is it important to start that coordination early. And it's not a bad thing, but when is it the right thing? Because if it's at the end, it's too late at the end.
All right, well, I think that's gonna be our last word, because I want to open this up for questions. And I'm sure the panel will agree with me. So if you have a question, please approach the mic. Yes.
Hi, Rebecca Fuller, VP of Clinical Outcomes at CHDI Foundation, and also Chair of the MDS ECOA Committee. Thank you all for the great presentation, and I love to see the HD representation. Thanks, Lauren. So my question is about the qualitative research in scale development. Yes, it's extremely important, and I know there are qualitative research journals where it can be published, but I think it's really important to publish it in the scale development journals. And often they say, we'll come back when you have the psychometrics. And it's like, oh, okay, I get that. But then they want you to squish down the qualitative research into 2 teeny tiny paragraphs so that you have room for all your psychometric analyses. How do we engage the scale development group and wider, I guess, wider authorities that publish on how to give enough weight to the qualitative research that you have to do beforehand?
I can
Carla,
I can start with a stab at that one. So I agree with you completely. I always feel really disappointed when I see this magnificent qualitative research come down to 2 paragraphs in a psychometric paper. Not downplaying my psychometric colleagues is equally important. But I would take it a step further. So not so much the scale development journals, but the actual clinical journals. Like, who are the users, the end users of this scale? Who needs to understand why we should be measuring what we're measuring and how that feeds into the scales that are available? So when we're working on a project, we always try first for the higher tier clinical journals in the field. So let's get this out there. Let's get the information to the end users who need to know this, who need to know that a scale is coming, or that there's a gap and something should be done here, or thinking about your trial design. What are the types of patient-focused endpoints that should be included, and how could I measure them? And that all comes back to that foundational qualitative study. So I'd say aim high as you can for the clinical journal. And then another strategy is publishing them as companion papers. So having your qualitative work and your psychometric work come together to a single journal, and then giving it its own weight in its own paper.
Yeah, I couldn't agree, Carla, even more. And I had that own personal experience. So when I was doing my PhD, I did work in kidney transplant patients, right? And we were doing focus group interviews, right? We were talking about post-transplant care and what were their worries and the access stuff, right? And the clinical journals refused to publish the papers, right? Because all the surgeons care about is the outcomes of the transplant, not this stuff. 10 years later, Almost 10 years later, I'm at FDA, and it was there was a companion piece between the kidney transplant, the transplant consortium here at CPATH wrote a piece, and FDA wrote a companion piece, because they just had done a PFDD median transplant patients, and it got accepted by Transplantation, which is the big clinical journal for that. And I remember calling my PhD advisor going, it happened. It only took a decade, but it happened, right? Because to your point, and I think this is with some of the conversations that we've been having with the ALS FRS study, is we're going to aim for that clinical journal, right? Because I think the second the study that we showed about what's going on ALS is what was missing, the qualitative work. It's not in the literature.
Well, and I think one thing on that I'll say is that when I was at CDRH, we'd always have the clinical reviewers, the clinicians help write the papers. That way we knew they had a better sense of what those journals want to see, what their colleagues would want to know. And so having that cross-functional team working on the paper, I think is really important as well.
Thanks. And just a quick follow-up sort of comment is the qualitative information that a company might need and they don't know about it, I don't know, to the last minute. Is there a way to collate and share all the qualitative data that we're collecting so that a company, say, such as yours, could mine that data to know what you need, and you don't have to run that study in the quarter that you have? Yeah. I'm all for sharing the qualitative data, and we should talk about how to do that more.
We've been talking about that within CPATH quite a bit
Yeah.
recently, because we know people have data that would help answer some questions we have. And so we're trying
Yeah.
to figure that out as well.
And it's all about wording the informed consents properly. So give us that
Yeah.
language. Okay, thanks.
Yes.
I just change angle. So Derek Hill from UCL in London and Panoramic Digital Health. Michael, you talked about your experience in a variety of funding scenarios for companies. And I just, are you able to kind of say what funding model works better? I mean, it seems if you're a small public company and any meeting with the FDA is disclosable, that's disastrous in terms of your ability to engage regularly and often. But at the same time, you've experienced in private equity-backed businesses, which have a very different set of agendas. I just wonder if you kind of feel, is there a better or worse funding for this sector to get innovation to happen, engage with regulators?
So, I mean, yeah. So I would say that my company currently was founded by Blackstone Life Sciences because they believed that the pre-commercialization, pre-revenue biotech environment in the public markets was destructive to innovation in neuroscience. That was the whole foundations of the company, because their belief was when you take something that's promising in the neuroscience and psychiatric area, you take it private, you protect it from the public markets, and then you fund it through the only catalyst that matters, which is approval, you get better decision-making and you get better products. That was the whole founding element of our current company. So I'm a little biased in what I think is the better environment. But I would say that a lot of what we're doing now, that Blackstone commitment and how we spend it, they don't really watch how we spend it. They watch the total and they watch the timeline to get the 3 months is at the back end, just so everybody is. It's an approval 3 months, not the 3-month study. But am I changing the time to approval? Am I spending more money than what they've given me? Within that envelope, I have full flexibility to make the decisions that best for the asset. And that's I have to explain it. Don't get me wrong. Every quarter I have to tell Blackstone what I'm spending their money on. But that's, in a way, it's one investor to worry about, not hundreds, and it's not public.
Thank you.
Makes a difference.
Hi, I'm Jillian from the Galactosemia Foundation. I participated in an ELP-FDD a couple years ago, and I learned a lot from it. I guess I have one comment about managing expectations during a PFDD for patients and debriefing of patients after exactly what happens when it goes behind the black curtain. We didn't get questions like you asked, and it felt a little like, where's our data going? What is happening with this? We learned a lot, and it was good, but still, even now I'm like, oh, if I could do it over again. And we also have toxic positivity in our group. Please don't share because you're going to scare the new parent. And we don't talk about where now we're a lot more empowered than we were maybe 5 years ago. We didn't even have an advocacy group. Now we do. We have a better voice. How, when we talk about statistics and data, how do you measure the success of a PFDD meeting?
Can I respond really quick to this?
Of course.
So you mentioned you didn't get the questions, especially with an externally led PFDD, which we went through in 2024. I can't say it was perfect. I can't say, like, if you were in that room, there were tensions going on beforehand. There were, trying to lead up to that meeting. It was figuring out what needs to be said and, communication, effective communication, right? And so I would say my overall feeling of that meeting was not positive in that light, as far as like our side of things, our community side of things. However, what made the difference for me and what changed my mind on how successful it was is because of people like Michelle and the fact that she felt the tension in that room, and she's like, okay, I know the community is now drained, and she spoke up, which was huge for us. And the other part of that was after our meeting, Critical Path Institute immediately called us and said, let's set up next steps and action items so we make sure that we keep this momentum going. So I think that's a huge part of it, is continuing to make sure that after the meeting, you're still involved in those conversations and that you have somebody like CPATH who is working with you to make sure that momentum continues.
So I can't tell you how many times in the virtual ones where I'm like, I have a question I want to ask. I have a follow-up. How do I get it to the moderator, right? Particularly when they're virtual. And I think that's hard. And people joke with me when I'm like, so whose email do I send them my question to, right? Or I'll do the YouTube question chat because I'm on that same platform that is being used for everyone else, right? So there are plenty of times when I'm like, I have a question, or it could be a missed opportunity. I need a little digging deeper, a little, sometimes. And I will say there's been a lot of lessons learned through the externally led PFD programs. And there is now starting to be more debriefing posts that with the communities and FDA folks. And there have been some more recent ones we've had that have been virtual where we are hearing things, and we've talked about that with the communities to say, hey, here's a question we would really like if you could help kind of answer this for us, right? We're hearing this repeatedly. You've brought it up a lot. Here's what the follow-up question would have been, right? And so some are. I would say, not to be discouraged, I understand the perspective of what you're saying about, how do you balance new folks, people who have been living it for a while, and getting people engaged for that. I would say the second point to your question is, which is the number one question I get, is, well, how do you use this information? All right, we come here, FDA is a black box, we don't know what happens. And if we don't have something that's in the pipeline, so the number one success is I have an approval, right? We can clearly definely see that is like, that's it. But that's not what you're really wanting to know, is how do I use what I just spent my last 5 hours pouring my heart out to you, FDA? How are you using that information? That's what you really care about. And so my response is this, and I talk a lot of this to patient groups, is, so in our listening sessions and in our PFDD meetings, what you don't see, particularly with the virtual piece, if you're in person, you actually see us and we're taking notes and we're listening. We're still doing that when we're virtual. But what you're not seeing is behind the scenes is the ongoing chats that are happening among us, where we are talking about what we are hearing live, okay? There are many times where we're hearing about symptoms or experiences and we're sitting going, well, can we measure that? What would that look like, right? What would that trial design look like? We are actively trying to think about how to incorporate what we're hearing into, if someone came in tomorrow, what advice would I give, right? So we do actively try to take that and bring it in. And it has been extremely helpful in diseases where we've had programs and we've heard things that, maybe was not in the company's mind, the symptom to target, right? Or something like that. But maybe we're like, hey, have you thought about adding this as a way to measure this? It has helped us in thinking about, how often should we be measuring things, right? And so we do take that advice. The voice of the patient report of some sort, where I know some patient listening sessions are putting out summaries. One comes out with the PFDD meetings. Those are very informative to us. We get them, they're in a repository, we access them, and we can go and look them up all throughout a development program. So not just at the time when a marketing application comes in, but when that IND is in-house and live and we've got to get advice and you're talking about something. And well, first thing we do, has there been a listening session? Has there been a PFDD meeting? Let's go see what's out there. So we are constantly using it. I know it's not seen immediately, but I can assure you that the meetings that I'm a part of and the teams that from the Office of Neuroscience that are listening in are active. We are actively behind the scenes talking. And if you see me at one and it's hybrid and you see me on my computer like this, it's because I'm talking to whoever's watching it virtually back in White Oak, who are also listening. And we may be trying to think of a new plan, right? We may be thinking this, it happens all the time. So we are listening, we are taking it back. Unfortunately, I can't show that to you. So now you've got to trust, right? And that's a hard thing, right? No, I'm saying I'm not afraid to say the obvious, right? Mm-hmm. That's a hard thing. You now got to trust that we're going to use it, right? I have nothing to give you. I don't have a tangible thing yet until I have an approved product, right? So you've got to be like, okay, we did our best, but I know at least in neuroscience that we actively use these all the time and we are taking them back to our everyday work.
Thank you.
And I apologize for those who are still in line. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I encourage you to find us afterwards and talk to us, but I want to be mindful and make sure everybody gets a break as well, so.
Thank you, and let's thank them again for this great panel.